I can't get to the, can I minimize this for a minute? Now, how do I get that over there? Wait, I'm on judges picks. I want to be on, I want it to be
Over there.
I don't want judges picks though. Okay, let me get to. Okay. Oh, how do I get this over here? There it is. This is so tricky. Okay. Can you guys see that? Yeah. It's time to reveal the results of the BPS Summer Song Challenge. Am I too loud? Am I okay? Okay. And we had a pretty good activity there. There were a lot of people who entered images. We were supposed to create images that went with the song title. And so I asked a friend of mine whose name is John Bosler. He's a photographer and a photography teacher. He taught photography in high school for many years. When I went to talk to him after this was all over, he said he thinks he probably graded in his years as a photography teacher at least 20,000 photographs. So I thought he probably was a good choice for being our judge. He kindly rated each image based on 3 categories. The impact of the image, the technical quality, and also how well it expressed the title. And each of those was worth 10 points. And so he graded based on the way he used to grade in school. And then if the song was by Bob Dylan, this was my personal addition, you got an extra bonus point. Because I wanted to make it a Bob Dylan song challenge, but it ended up being any song challenge. So it is time to reveal the winners. Those who participated will get us the spreadsheet with all the, he wrote a comment about each image and you'll see what your scores were. So in first place, oh wait, these are the judges' picks. We also did a people's choice. So for the judges' picks, in first place was Vince Pellegrini, All Along the Watchtower by Bob Dylan. So he got the extra Dylan point. I will tell you that what the judge said about this one was it's a black and white, enhances the stark reality, reminding us of history and oppressed countries. Good job, Vince. Second place, Lee Reeves, You're So Vain by Carly Simon. And John said, with today's social media and influencers, this photo says it all. He says, maybe less depth of field to have the performers really stand out. In third place, Kim Swimler, Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash. He says, great, dangerous technical work. He wondered if you photoshopped the man inside the ring. She says no, she did not. And he actually came up with 2 honorable mentions. The first one was James Yost, The Man in the Long Black Coat by Bob Dylan. He wrote, excellent lighting might have more impact if the subject was standing to see the length of the coat. And the final honorable mention was Karen Lay's Starry, Starry Night, also known as Vincent, not this Vincent, the other Vincent, or any of his cousins who were all named Vincent, I've found out. And so is his grandfather. I mean, it's just crazy. And what John said here was the oil painting effect matched the original artist's idea. Good technically, probably could be just as strong without the filter. Now we move on to our People's Choice. And guess what? Karen Lay took first place in the People's Choice Award with her Starry, Starry Night. Second place, Bret Hart Cop, Bicycle Race by Queen. And I think that creative technique, that was yours? Oh, then he gave me the wrong number for that. 28. That was Bob's. I got to fix my thing. That was Bob's. Sorry. Bicycle Race. What was your number, Bob?
That's 28.
I know. I know what it says. I'm wondering what his number. Well, all right. Sorry. That was Bob. Bob's right here. He won. And finally, third place, Karen Lay, I Love a Rainy Night by Eddie Rabbitt. So congratulations to everybody. And so you're back, you're on now.
Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I know that was some work this summer. And if we do that next summer, hopefully get twice as many participants, all right?
Some people said they would like to participate.
Yep. Let me close these. This is tricky because I'm backwards. All right. And where did my presentation go? Hold on, folks. There we go. All right, so now I'm on. Oh, so much pressure. Yep. And I'm on the wrong slide already. There we go. That's where we should be, right there. Okay. Jay asked me to do. Oh, no, I'm not. Maybe that higher. All right, Jay asked me to do a presentation. I said, okay, I'll do a presentation. I chose flash photography. And then I realized I don't know as much about flash photography as half of our members. Okay. So the last couple of days, I'm sweating bullets. Because I leave everything go to the last minute. So of course I didn't do this presentation over the summer. I did it the last couple of weeks. Right. So there's Rick. He's laughing because he's one of our flash experts here. Kim's back there with all her flash expertise back there. We got all these people who know flash, and they probably know some things better than I do. So you're going to learn it with me, okay? And you notice I said learn from my mistakes, and I used embrace the flash because I've been going on the internet, here and there. And one guy has a really good series of flash tutorials, and the title of his tutorial is Don't Fear the Flash, right? And I don't know how many members, and some of them are professionals. I say, do you do flash photography? No, I don't do flash photography. I'm a purist. I do nothing but, ambient light, natural light, and all that, okay? And me too, okay? Because when I'm out in the field, I don't want to carry extra stuff. So I don't have my flash with me all the time. And a lot of times I wish I did, okay? So embrace the flash, learn from my mistakes. And now we're going to get into some, I said quick, but I realize it's probably not going to be as quick as it should be. Some quick techie stuff. We hate techie stuff when we're out there being artistic, but we need to know the techie stuff before we can be artistic. So that's what a lot of my slides are going to be, is some of the technical stuff, okay? Because if you know the technical stuff, then you know how to use your flash. People buy a flash. How many of you have a flash, by the way? Right? How many of you use your flash? Okay, half as many hands went up, right? And the reason is why? Because every time we use flash, it looks horrible, okay? It looks horrible. It just sort of blows out the highlights, looks fake, and you put it down and you don't put it in your bag anymore because I don't want to carry it because it makes my photography look horrible, right? So we need to know some techie stuff to make it look less horrible. See the little Z's down there? How many of you are Zing out already? Okay, that's why I brought my flash, because if I hear Z's, I'm going to flash you guys and wake you back up, right? So flash sync speed, why it matters. Flash duration, why it matters sometimes. Flash and ambient light and flash sync modes. That's what we're going to cover here. And a little extra, I don't have it on the slide up there. One little extra thing that we're going to cover, right? So first thing is flash sync speed. And I get this question a lot when people are using flash. I want to go faster. It only allow me to go so fast. Even in manual mode on your cameras, a lot of times mine, if I have a flash connected, I can only go up to 1/200th of a second. And the first time that happened, like, oh, something's broken. I don't know something's broken. It's because I had a flash connected. It was turned on. It has to be turned on too. And my camera is smarter than me. and it says, wait a minute, Bob, you have a flash connected. You can't sync your flash and your camera above, on mine, it's 1/200th of a second. Canon, Nikon, Sony, Olympus, they're all a little bit different, but those are the two most common flash sync speeds, 200 to 250th of a second. So if you had that happen and you're trying to go faster and your camera won't let you go faster, maybe it's because you have a flash connected to your camera. Okay, we're gonna clear that up a little bit later because you can go faster, but you have to do some settings before that. Okay, you can always go slower than your sync speed. Okay, and you can go slower and get some really nice, cool effects if you go slower than the sync speed. So it's the fastest your shutter and your flash can sync together to cover the exposure, right? And it's all because of mechanics. How many of you have mirrorless? Half the room will put up their hand now, okay? That's going to change eventually, but it still is mechanical. That comes from what it comes from is in our mirrored cameras, the mirror has to move up, okay? And then the shutters have to move, and they're called curtains. It's all mechanical. So the sensor of the film is only exposed totally at that speed so that you can get the entire flash within the exposure, right? So I'm going to try to do a little demo here. I don't know if it's going to work, all right? I don't know if it's going to work. All right. So you're ready to take your shot, and then the shutter's closed. You hit the button and it takes the exposure. Did you see what happened? No, you didn't. Don't lie to me. You didn't. It's too fast. It's too fast. Okay, so I'm going to slow it down. Okay. So what happens is you hit, the first curtain opens, okay, and then the flash hits, and then the second curtain closes. So they always show it like a curtain, okay, because it's mechanical, and there's only a certain time in between where it's totally open, okay. Your flash needs the fire right when it's open, right? There's Bob running not very fast, right? So at 200th of a second, you can freeze my action without the flash, okay? I'm not that fast, so if you take a 200th of a second, I'll be frozen, right? But somebody who's a lot faster than me, my son and whoever, you need the flash to freeze him within that 200th of a second, right? So your flash needs the fire when it's totally open. Okay, we're going to talk about high-speed sync a little bit later, and the flash reacts differently, right? So when you're at 200th of a second, and you have a lot of sunshine, a lot of ambient light, and the subject is moving faster than the slow Bob running over there, you're going to get a little bit of blur along the edges, a little bit of shadowing along the edges, because you're going to get some of that motion trail. And if you can go at 200th of a second and freeze it, that's fine. But if you can't, you might bump up the speed, but you have to set everything within your camera, within your flash, to use high-speed sync. We're going to talk about that much later. Okay, so you can go slower. So if you go slower, right, some of it has to do, and this is, I hate this, I stole this from somebody else. This gets way too techy, but the problem is, even at the higher speeds, your flash duration can also add a little bit of blur around the edges, right? So a flash, they always say a flash happens within 10,000ths of a second. Poof, it's there, right? But yeah, it's there, but then it fades off. And the problem here is the flash duration is when it's fading off. So it's not a 10,000ths of a second. It might be 10,000 seconds to fire up. It's like an explosion, okay? Flash, and then it dies down. Think of it as an explosion, and the embers always die down. So that's that tail part when it's dying down that extends that time, right? Every flash is different, right? So I'm going to show 3 of the flashes that I used in some of the demos here. All right. I use Godox, and I use a lot of old stuff too. But I think Rick used Godox, Kim used Godox in our workshops here. Angel, you're shaking your head. How many of you have Godox flashes? They're a good brand because of the price. quality, and maybe not so much durability. But the Godox is, I won't say cheap, but more affordable, right? And you also have radio triggers and all that built in and a lot of features that we look for, right? Now, this is the flash duration, and the flash duration will change if you dial down the power. So these are the two that I'll be using, and all of the different durations, half power, quarter power, eighth power, and so forth. And they can go down to 1/256 of full power. It's just a little tiny burst of light, right? So it takes a lot less time to get up to that 256 power. So it's a lot faster. So the duration at full power, you can see that one in the middle is the one I use most for this presentation. It's 1/300th of a second. So it's fairly fast. It's faster than my flash sync speed, right? So the whole thing is going to happen within that flash sync speed. If I dial it way down to 256 power, it happens in 1/20,000th of a second. So it's a little pop of flash, and the durations is a lot faster, but you're only going to get very little light out of that flash. The AD200 Pro, it's 3 times more powerful than the V1 in the middle. So you're going to get a lot more power, a lot more light at full power, and it's going to last 1/220th of a second. Okay, so it's a little bit slower because it has more light in that explosion. And if I dial it way down to 256, it's going to be a lot more light than the middle one. It's going to be a little bit slower too. 13,000, I think you could freeze me running, even on my bike, or even rolling down the hill, you'll be able to freeze me at 13,000ths of a second. So the flash duration matters when you're doing something ultra fast, ultra speed. If you're doing like a little balloon bursting or bubbles bursting, and you're doing macro work, everything happens a lot faster. Okay, so to make your flash faster, dial down the speed. That's why when we're doing macro work, we usually start at like an 1/8 or a quarter at the most, for 2 reasons: not to overpower the subject, and also we're using our flash to freeze the motion, right? But at that tight of a space and that magnification, everything's going to happen faster. So if you dial it down, your duration's a lot faster too, okay? It only matters in very high speed photography, right? Now, you can buy a lot more expensive flashes than I own. Believe me, you can. And those higher end flashes, studio flashes, things like that, they have different modes. They can cut off that tail. The Profoto line of studio flashes, for instance, I forget what they call it, freeze mode or something like that. It cuts off the tail. Okay, so all of the durations are about the same, and it's extremely fast. And they're a lot more powerful too, so they can burst faster too than our little speed lights. So you don't have to worry about this if you're doing still lifes, portraits. If your subject is standing still, you don't have to worry about this at all, because that 200th of a second, 300th of a second is going to freeze things, right? All right, so let's get some motion. So I'm in my basement, okay, and I have this little desk fan. It's black plastic, luckily, so it's black. So I fire it up to the slowest speed it can go. I put some stickers. I took the grill, the safety grill off of it. I still have all my fingers, okay? Because I'm stumbling around at one point in total dark and the fan's spinning somewhere in front of me. I put some stickers on it because I wanted to see the motion, okay? So black on black, you're not gonna see anything, okay? I put some shop lights on it. Oh, this is just ambient light, and that's at 200th of a second. So you're getting all this blur, okay? So 200th of a second is not going to stop the motion of those blades, right? So can you read what those stickers say? No, okay. All right. So just to prove my point, I turned out all the lights. So it's totally dark because I don't want any ambient light. And I put the the speed light at 100% power. And remember, that's at 1/300th of a second with that V1. And it's still not fast enough on the left-hand side. It's a little blown out because I didn't adjust anything, but it's 100% power on that little speed light. The duration matters here because it's not fast enough to freeze anything. That's why if you're taking photographs at 100% power of your speed light, and you're working at 200 because that's as fast as we can go at that sync speed, you're still not going to totally freeze an explosion or bursting balloon or bursting bubbles because it's happening faster than your duration, right? On the right-hand side, I dialed it way down to 256, very little light. So I had to up the ISO so I can collect the light a little bit faster. So that's, I think I figured out in my head, it's 9 stops less power. Okay, so 9 stops less power. I should change either the ISO or open up the aperture to collect more light faster. So it's dimmed down, but look what it did. It stopped the motion because the duration is a 30,000th of a second. So it does matter when you're doing something that's moving that fast. Okay. It's actually off to the side a little bit. Yeah, it's firing right here. It's my yes, it's triggered by my camera. It could be on my camera, yes, because I'm sort of shooting it straight on anyhow. It's shooting straight on, yes. But 256 of a second, it's 3,000ths of a second duration. And that's fast enough to almost, if I zoom in, it's still not freezing those letters and numbers. So that's some measuring tape that I stuck on there. If you read real close, it's crime scene products. Okay, that's what they use on the crime scene. So that's from the lab. I didn't do anything, but if I take it into Lightroom and I bump it up 2 stops in Lightroom, then I have enough light. Okay, but that's why I could never figure out why are my bubble bursting never really quite in focus. That's because I was shooting it with half power or full power, and the duration just wasn't fast enough to freeze the little pops of the bubbles. Right. So keep that in mind. You might have your focus perfect, but you're getting a little bit of motion blur in those real fast situations. Here's what happens if you add some ambient light. Okay. So remember, I was doing those previous ones in total darkness, right? So there's no ambient light at all. So on the left-hand side, ambient light without flash. So I'm getting that motion blur, okay? I left the ambient light on, so I still get the motion blur of the rotating. But at that 256 power, it pops and freezes that moment of that rotation. It's washed out because we still have that motion blur exposure in that same spot. So we're not going to get 100% blacks there because I still have that white motion blur behind it. But that's what we're going to use to do our motion trails. Okay, so we can remember we can go slower than our sync speed. So I'm doing everything here at 200th of a second because I'm staying within the sync speed. These are such interesting photographs, aren't they? Right. We usually judge our speakers by the gorgeous photographs. I don't have any in here. All right, so ambient light effect with the flash. So how do we get rid of the ambient light if we don't want any of that blur? Okay, you can do what I did and just turn out all the lights in the basement and do it in total darkness and just use the flash. If you can't do that, you can turn out the lights, you can block the lights with the light that's coming in through the windows. Choose a darker time of day. You know, do it at night or at dusk or whatever when you have less light. So you cut down on the ambient light. Because if I do this in our sunroom at the middle of the day, I'm not going to be able to get the same effects because everything's going to be lit up so bright, and I can't go any faster right now than 200th of a second, right? Lower the ISO because you're collecting light slower, okay? So you can lower it down to lowest number, -100, right? Close down the aperture, okay? There, the problem is you're increasing the depth of field. So if you want shallow depth of field, you can't really do that. Add a neutral density filter. I think, Vince, you did that up in the Ellis Island. I was on that. You should show everybody that technique in a talk sometime. Okay, so add neutral density filters to cut down the amount of light or slow down light. or use high-speed sync. Okay, we're going to talk about high-speed sync a little bit later. So we're going to stay with that 1/200th of a second for the next couple of sections of our presentation. Okay, so yep.
Is your point here that you're trying to get the ambient light exposure too low
Yes.
to get a properly exposed image?
Yeah. So if you want to eliminate or make the trails less, okay, the blur less, you got to get rid of the ambient light. That's what's causing those motion blurs or the edge, what looks like out of focus at that very high speeds. Okay, so you got to get rid of the ambient light to remove the motion blur, right?
So to know how to do that, you need to take a reading without your flash.
Well, when I was in,
Underexpose it, however, you're going to compensate for the flash, correct?
or just turn all, if we turn all the lights off in here, that's probably what I had in my basement. Okay, I wasn't in total black, okay, because I couldn't see and I'd break everything in my basement if I was walking around in total darkness. So I had a little bit of light, but every time the flash would flash, I was blinded and then I was stumbling around, right? But you don't have to eliminate all the light. As long as the ambient light is so low, you don't have any exposure in your frame. That's going to be more important during the high speed sync part of it, right?
To your point, studio lighting, that's the first thing to do.
Yeah, in studio lighting, yes.
You want to start out with a black background, so you want to minimize or remove your ambient light so that you're in complete control using.
Yeah. So what Rick said, that's the first thing you do in studio lighting is get rid of the ambient light. So you control the lighting environment with your lights, with your flashes. And you're talking more studio flashes bigger than what I'm talking about here, the speed lights. So we're going to talk about using these speed lights outside, and you can't control the ambient light outside. So we're going to go into high speed sync. Val? Bouncing? Yeah, for outside. Yes, that'd be high speed sync, which we're going to get to later on. Yeah. Okay, so there's 3 sync modes, and some cameras have a 4th or maybe a 5th sync mode also. Though I think the Nikon has something called slow sync or slow speed sync or something like that. And that has to do with where the flash fires, okay, during that wide open curtain, right? So if you don't set anything as far as flash sync, you're going to be using first curtain sync. First curtain sync means when the curtain is totally open, it's going to fire. And then whatever happens afterwards happens, right? Second curtain sync is what I'm going to show you here. And this is going to control, what you want to do is control those motion trails that are happening, right? All right, so we got slow bob running again, okay? But my son was home for a weekend. I asked him to just ride his bike up and down the driveway. He said, "No, that's boring. I'm going to pile some logs and I'm going to ride over the logs," right? Okay. So first curtain sync, what happens is, and remember, I'm open for 1 second now. So I can go slower than that 1/200th of a second. And the reason I brought it down to 1 second is I want motion blur. I want that motion blur. So we're not in total darkness, but it's in dim evening light. So the sun's starting to go down. So I need some ambient light to get the motion blurs. Okay. I don't have control over the background here. So you're going to see what happens a little bit later. Wherever he's bright and the background's bright, it's going to disappear, because what you're doing with the flash is you're exposing that. And well, what's exposure? It's capturing light. So if there's already light there, you're not going to capture more light. It's just going to get brighter, right? So with the first curtain sync, it froze him at the beginning of the 1 second. So we popped it and then he kept moving. Okay, he kept moving. That's where all the motion blur is in front of him. So it doesn't look natural, right? If that's what you want, that's fine, but it doesn't look natural. It looks, what's going on? Why is the steam coming off his head? Okay. So he's moving left to right. So the motion blur is happening after the fire, the flash fired. So this is a 1 second exposure. And I realized he's actually out of my frame after 1 second. He couldn't ride any slower. He said, "I can't ride slower. I'll fall over on these logs." Okay. You should see how sweaty he was by the time we got done, right? So it's a 1 second exposure. You see what's happening with all the static elements, the logs, the grass. That's because I can't hold that camera that steady in 1 second either. I'm not on a tripod. So I'm hand holding this. So that motion is coming from me just jiggling around, right? Okay, so that's first curtain sync. This is, I set the flash to second curtain sync. Now, some of your cameras, and this is where you need to know your equipment. My Pentax, I go, boo, Pentax, okay? Yay, Nikon, you know. My Pentax cannot do second curtain sync unless the flash is connected to my camera, okay? I found that out that night because I had the trigger on and I couldn't figure out how to do second curtain sync with the trigger. I can't do that on my Pentax. I think Nikon can, I think Canon can, Olympus might be able to do it. So if you're setting up second curtain sync on other equipment, you have to set it up on your camera and your flash, right? And your camera and your flash has to communicate to each other. So if you have a flash and it is not made for your camera, you can't do this because your camera and the flash have to talk to each other. They have to sync together. So my V1, that Godox V1, I bought the Pentax version, but it can't communicate through the triggers for second curtain sync unless I put it on my camera or I connect it with a cable. I have ways of tricking it. If you have time, I'll share it with you if you have a Pentax, but it's just for the Pentax, right? Okay. So this is what you get with second curtain sync. It's firing at the end. So he's through the frame, right? And I had to cut it down to 1/2 second because he couldn't ride that slow. Okay, so at 1/2 second, he went that far, right? This is slowing down the shutter to cause that blur, right? Okay, and then I have a couple more here. Okay, on the Godox, it's on the back. That's not my screenshot. It's ETTL. What is that? Mine says PTTL. That's that auto setting. Yours might say something different, but there's always a button somewhere to make a sync, to turn it into either second curtain or high speed sync. And if you don't see a symbol, that means it's on first curtain sync, just the defaults, right? Okay. So if you push that sync button on the back when you're in the TTL mode, you'll see the second curtain sync icon up there. And that's pretty universal. The last triangle is either dark or light, depending on what screen it's on, right? And it's firing at the end of the exposure.
And the TTL means?
And I'm not doing TTL tonight, but TTL means through the lens, okay, metering, right? I should have added this to the presentation because it does affect some things with your flash, right? When you do TTL, the flash and the camera have to communicate. So again, you can't do TTL unless you have a flash that's made for your camera made, right? So if you want to do TTL, which is auto metering with your flash, it does a pre-flash, a little burst of light. It reads back into the camera in the flash, and it sets the power that you need for that exposure, correct exposure, okay? So it's actually 2 flashes. It happens so fast you don't see it, okay? I've seen it because I've seen a video where they slowed it down enough where it's a pop of light. It's not strong enough, and it's not during the flash or during the exposure, so it doesn't affect your exposure. But it will affect any other flashes in the room or in the area that's set to that slave mode, where if it sees a flash, it'll fire, right? So you don't want to use that with that kind of syncing. And there's settings on that second flash, that receiver flash, that you can say, don't go off on the first flash, go off on the second, right? So that does affect that, but it's a pre-flash. And it meters for you. That's an auto setting for your flash is what it is, right? I'm doing everything tonight using just manual settings. Okay. Now this is second curtain sync, and I'm also panning. Let me go back to the previous one. By default, I use instinct. I usually pan when I'm doing like shooting bikers or runners or motorcycles or whatever. So you're starting to see a little bit of panning in the background. If I had this on the tripod, all the background elements would be static, right? But I'm sort of panning because he's riding up and down the driveway and right at me for quite a while. Another thing I noticed as we're doing this, I'm only getting motion trails where his white hat, his white bike, his white skin, whatever. I'm not getting a whole lot of trails because he had a dark shirt on, right? So I did ask him, oh, go, you're sweating too much anyhow. Go put on a different shirt. So he put on his more of a dress shirt, a little more of a dress shirt as he was riding. Now I got bigger motion trails. You're only going to get those motion trails where you're capturing bright areas against the dark background. So he had to be brighter than the background to actually get more motion. Now I'm panning again, but I'm panning intentionally this time, okay? And he's riding up a bank and down a bank, so he's riding through the scene. So now the scene is sweeping around, and I'm getting that motion of the background in that sweep also. That's why the motion trails are kind of an odd shape, because he's going up a bank and down towards me. So his motion looks bigger than the actual freeze, right? And that'll happen sometimes if it's not straight across, right? Now this is me panning, and the balls are on the table and they're not moving. I wasn't going to roll these bocce balls across our kitchen table and then smash everything on the other side of the room. So I just sat them up and said, I'll do second curtain sink, but I'm going to move. I'm going to add the motion. Okay, so as I'm sweeping across, you'll see that there are the highlights on the balls, and this is ambient light again. Okay, it's a little bit brighter than the basement. So it looks like they're moving, but I'm the one that's moving here. So you can do things like that if you use second curtain sink. The balls look like they're behind. Okay, I could have rolled the balls across and did the same thing, but it would have been a real mess, and it would have been more difficult to time. Right. So keep that in mind. If you want those motion blurs, just move your camera instead of moving the balls. I was moving this way. Yeah, I'm moving the way the balls should be moving. Right. Right. So they're moving across. Yeah, they're moving across. Yeah. Okay. And I kept this one in. I was trying to make it look like they're bouncing. I couldn't really do it. I'm all over the place. But I kept this in because remember, the brightest part of that object is going to leave the motion trails. So I'm getting some motion trails from the highlights on the balls, but the big white line is that little white sticker on that bocce ball. That's what it is. Okay, so that's why I left this in. It didn't do what I wanted it to do it with. I wanted to show you that whatever's the brightest on your subject, that's going to be the brightest trail too.
How come the line didn't connect to the circle?
Because the flash overpowered it. Okay, no, the flash isn't going to overpower it. It's moving. I'm moving, and the ball's not moving. So what I have here is I have the last frozen, and it's kind of wiping out, or it's remember, it's dark. It's dark in the whole time. I might have stopped moving or whatever. I might have been a little bit jerky. Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
You stopped before the exposure was done.
probably. Yeah, because the table's not, the table looks like it's still, because it's frozen with the flash. So if I didn't do this with any flash at all, the table would be almost black dark. So it lit up the table at the very end. There's very little highlights on the table or anything like that until I flashed it. Yeah. So it was just enough ambient light to get a little bit of the highlights on the balls and that sticker, but the table is very, very dark. So it was underexposed. If I should have took one with the flash to prove that. Next time I'll improve this presentation for you, Angel. This is in the basement again, total dark, black background. The ambient light is coming from a little LED panel on the table underneath the brushes, and I just swung the brushes on some a fishing line. That's why it's not nice and sweeping across, because the fishing line, they're bouncing and spinning a little bit as they're moving. Okay, so, and I had to clean up the fishing line because the fishing line did appear in the last. The important part when you're doing this also is not to get any ambient light on the background, and have the background far enough away from your subject. So the background is about 6 foot away from the subjects, and it was still picking up a little bit of the flash and a little bit of the light. The flash was directly on the left-hand side, just shooting from the left-hand side. Okay, the ambient light was shining directly up from the table underneath the brushes. And then this one, I grabbed the paintbrush and swept it a little bit so the motion trails aren't straight across. It gives you that weird circle pattern. And I didn't realize how furry my arm was until I lit it up. Okay, so I'm going to get that off of there. I should have put a black shirt on and a black glove and did it with that. Okay, so if you don't want yourself to appear in these shots, wear black shirt, long sleeves, black gloves, maybe a black tassel cap and whatever, because you show up quite a bit when you're doing this and you don't even realize until you're done, you take everything down and you put it on the screen. Okay, this is what I did many years ago, and I must have bounced that tennis ball 100 times before I got it to line up correctly. Right, I should have just done it in Photoshop, but the challenge was to do it all on camera. This is my old photo club, and it was rear curtain flash. That was the challenge for that month. So I had to bounce it and bounce it and bounce it and bounce it. And I didn't have triggers either, so I was doing it by hand. I was bouncing all over the place. And remember, it's total darkness, but you can sort of see the background there. It wasn't 100% black in the background, but that's the motion. And if I wouldn't have done that with the second curtain sync, all the blur would be in front of the balls, right? All right, so we've been using flash, and the flash is temperature, correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, around 500K, right? It's that white light, okay? It's about the daylight, right? So if you just flash it, everything's gonna, in this case, this was vapor off of a humidifier, and it just makes it all white. You can gel your flashes, right? You can buy gels. Kim, do you use gels in the workshops? No, you've been using them, okay? Gels can add special effects, stylize. You see the blues and the reds and the oranges and things in fashion photography all the time. So they put a gel on their flash, or you do it in Photoshop. Okay, a gel is usually I actually brought some. Okay, that little round flash. They're filters. Okay, I know you asked because you wanted me to explain it to everybody else. The Godox system has these little ones. These are color correcting. So if you're taking photographs at the golden hour, you want your flash to be the golden hour color. So that's one mistake that you do outside is you use your flash and it's going to blast that person with white light, and it really should be blasting a person with the golden hour color, right? So that's what these are for, to color correct your flash when you're doing images in like fluorescent light or golden hour or incandescent light. You want your flash to match. You can put these on and push the colors wherever you want. What I did here is actually, does anybody have any of these? I don't know if you can see me out there. I'm holding up some of the old filters that you put on your lens in black and white. So I have a red one, I have a green one, I have a blue one, and I kept them, and these work really well. Okay, they work a lot better than little plastic ones. And how I use these, I wish I had bigger ones, okay, to cover the entire circle ahead. I put these in a black can cozy, okay, those black foam. I have the front and back cut out, and I shove these in there, and I use these for this shot right here. So I have a red one, a green one, I have a blue one. I didn't have a purple one, so I made my own out of some report covers. You can see these, you can find them at Staples, you can find them at the dollar store, they're plastic. I just cut pieces out and I put them in front of the flash. Be very, very, very careful because those flashes can get very, very hot, and those cheap plastic covers will melt, okay? And you don't want that to happen on your flashes, especially studio lights. But you can shoot through plastic, you can shoot through the glass, and you can buy whole filter kits or gel kits, right? But be careful because when you're firing those big studio lights, they get really hot. Some people in the workshop found that out because they touched them, I believe. Okay, even these small flashes get very hot. So what I did here is I fired the flash manually, and I just moved it around. I had 2 flashes, and I just, because I didn't have triggers back then, so I just let the exposure go for half a second or a 30th of a second and just fired them off. I should have had 4 hands. Okay. And this is just basically the same thing with some smoke. Now, I did this in camera. This was also a monthly challenge in the old club that I belonged to. And a lot of people were doing this in Photoshop. I didn't want to spend more time in Photoshop, so I gelled them or put the filters on. And I'm really glad I used red on that left one because it looks like a rose to me.
That's a multiple exposure.
No, that's one exposure. This is smoke.
Right, a long exposure.
30th of a second, half a second at the most. I had 2 flashes, just manually popping them off. That's all I did. So I had 1 red, 1 green, and I popped one from the, yeah. So I did 1 on the left, 1 on the right, or 1 from the top, 1 from the right. And where they mix, I get the other colors. So it's just a blue and a green, or blue and a purple and a red filters or gels. And it's random. So you could what happened this month, this is many years ago, I didn't sleep that whole night. I'm in the basement. My wife gets up. I'm still in the basement. She goes, "Did you go to bed?" And I said, "What time is it?" It's 6 o'clock. It's 7 o'clock, whatever. Oh, I didn't go to bed, right? Because it's addicting. And because it's so random, you just keep on going and keep on going. Right? Yeah, and that's why I didn't do incense. It's just a little smoke stick. It wasn't even incense. And I knew that she was upstairs and she would have smelled something burning in the middle of the night and came running down. So I switched over to the vaporizer. So the vaporizer gave me that effect. It really looks like a lot of smoke, but that's just not steam, it's just vapor. The way I channeled it to the small, tiny stream is I put a funnel on top of it. So it's funneling, but the whole table is getting wet after a while because I had a lot of vapor in the basement. Yeah. Okay, this was a little smoke stick. Okay, and to get the swirls, you just sort of wait for it to settle down because it's coming straight up. Just give it a little swirl with your hand. So I could show you hundreds of these, and they're all different. Again, it's like Ivan's micro crystal photography. You never know what you're going to get. Okay, instead of just white, this wouldn't have been interesting at all with just white. So I just put a little blue on the one. It has two flashes, one on the left, one on the right. And I just put a little blue on the right one. And that gave me a little more interest there instead of just almost black and white, because it's on a piece of glass on top of a black cloth. That gives me the mirror effect on the bottom and a little puddle of water in the middle of the glass. And that's pink. That's just a white ping pong ball. This is what I did for a whole day. Beautiful sunny day where you are out there getting gorgeous landscape shots or whatever you're doing. I was in the basement, right? And blowing bubbles with a piece of hose at the bottom of a fish tank. So I was blowing the bubble and it was coming up at the bottom and it was almost an explosion. And this is where I should have, this is learned from my mistakes, reduce the power of those flashes because the flash duration was giving me it wasn't quite as sharp. I thought I didn't have it focused, but I realized I had it on full power almost the whole time. And again, a pink report cover filter on the right and a blue one on the left, right? But this is something that I'd like to set up here and we can all play with it. I did take one of my flashes, I had it set up to high-speed sync, and I had an old studio light that can't do high-speed sync. And that was giving me some of the background light. And when I pushed up the high speed, like 250 or 300, those lights didn't do anything. Okay, it didn't add anything. So I got all these underexposed with half bright and half dark in the background. And that's because that big light wasn't syncing with my camera. It's almost showing you the effect. It's on the vertical there, but it's usually on the horizontal. All right, so now you guys talked about high-speed sync. Now I have to talk about high-speed sync. How are we doing? Not too bad. Okay. Okay, so high-speed sync allows us to go faster than our flash sync speed, right? And sometimes you just have to go faster. If you need to, capture and freeze motion, 200th of a second is just not going to do it. Even with our flash, it's not going to do it, right? The other reason is because you need to control the ambient light, and you want to use a wide open aperture for a shallow depth of field. That's another thing. We want shallow depth of field. We want to open up that aperture, 2.8, 1.4. Who has a faster lens than 1.4? Anybody here? I'm jealous if you do. Okay. So it's going to capture light really, really fast. No matter what I do, right? It's going to capture light really fast at 200th of a second. So a high-speed sync, again, you set this up on your flash, okay, with the sync button, and you also might have to set it up on your camera. It depends on your equipment, okay? Because the camera has to know that the flash is in high-speed sync mode to allow you to go faster than your sync speed, right? Okay. Now here's what happens. I tried to do a graphic here. Who knows if it works? What high-speed sync does, it doesn't just do one big flash, either at the beginning, the end, or the middle of your exposure. It does little flashes because at high speed, especially like at an 8,000th of a second, the first curtain is opening and the second curtain is almost following it. Because it's almost like a copy machine, right? So there's only part of the sensor or the film exposed at that high speed because the second curtain's closing as the first curtain is opening. So there's a slit open in your shutter. So instead of just bursting it at the beginning, at the end, or the middle where there's just that little opening, it pulses. So it pulses, you don't see it, okay? It pulses really quickly. And the problem with that small burst, that pulsing, it has to do so many firings within your time, within your 8,000th of a second, for instance. So what it does, so that you don't burn up your flash, okay? So nothing explodes in your flash, and it doesn't shut down because it's overheated, it reduces the power automatically. So if I'm setting it up for 8,000th of a second, it has to pulse so fast, okay, and so many times, it can't possibly physically do 100%, okay, 100% exposure, or half, or a quarter, or whatever. I did do an experiment, but it would have been really boring to show you all those results. But I used the same speed, same aperture, same ISO, or not the same speed, same ISO, same aperture, and just up the speed, and it got dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. Okay, I didn't downgrade the power. The flash itself did. Okay, so keep that in mind. That it will. I should up the ISO maybe one stop every time I cut the power or made the speed faster. Okay, because it was automatically downgrading the power. Right. So high-speed sync gives you control. And what it gives you control is when you're shooting in bright outdoor ambient light and you want shallow depth of field. So you want that, 2.4, 1.4, 2.8 aperture, and you can't cut down the ambient light. It's just all overexposed. You need to bump up the speed, okay? I can't bring down the ISO lower than 100, okay? I don't want to, stop down the aperture because I want to control the artistic effect, the depth of field. So I went wide open aperture. I went the lowest ISO. So I have to meter for the ambient light. And the only thing we have left is shutter speed. So the shutter speed does not, except it's downgrading the power a little bit, it doesn't affect the flash. It only affects the ambient. The aperture affects the flash and the ambient. The ISO affects the flash and the ambient, but the shutter speed only affects the ambient light, Okay, so the faster you go, the less light you're going to capture of the bright sunshine, for instance, right? So step one, actually, there's one step before this. Step one, compose. Okay, compose your image because that's the light you're shooting into or away from or whatever. So you want to compose your shot first, and then you meter for the ambient light. And you set the f-stop. So if you want that f-stop to be that 2.8, you set it there. You set the ISO. You want less noise, you set it to 100. And then you control the ambient light with the shutter speed. So you take it up to meter that light without any flash. So what happens is maybe your subject now is too dark. Maybe you have really bright backlight, for instance, and you want to bring in the details in the clouds. And if you're metering for the person, okay, or the flower, the bug, or butterfly, and it's backlit, that person, that butterfly, that bug, that flower is going to be underexposed, right? We're not worrying about that because we're going to fill that light in with our flash, right? So set your flash to high speed mode, okay? Because we want to bump up that shutter speed. So your flash, your camera has to be in high sync mode already if you want to control the ambient light with that shutter speed. Then you set your flash power, right? And you're testing how that flower is lit or that person is lit. So you're popping that light into the shadows, we'll say, right? Okay. To get that fill light. It's trial and error. Okay, a lot of us do trial and error, but better is if you have a light meter. So if you have a light meter, you can meter for your flash a lot more accurately because we don't want to change our aperture. So we want to shoot for 2.8 or 1.4 or whatever we're doing, right? So we don't want to play with the aperture. So we have to play with the power of the flash. So if you meter it, you can just pop the flash, meter it, and get it to whatever aperture you want to shoot at. Okay, trial and error is fine, but it's trial and error. Okay, so if you do have a light meter, and I'm not going to talk about light meters here, that's a lot better way of doing it. If you have a light.
Help balance the ambient.
Yes.
Flash and gives you more natural.
Yes, it gives you a more natural look, and you can set your power on your flash accurately. Okay, instead of just testing it on the back of your camera. Yeah, the back.
Goes without saying, it's serious reduction on your battery.
Yeah, yeah, yes. So if you can meter.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
The audience.
What Rick is saying is if you're doing this trial and error, you're flashing, just to dial in your flash. But if you have a meter, you can flash and meter it. You might have to pop it off twice instead of 10 times. Okay. So you save your flash battery power if you have a meter too. Okay. I just did this afternoon. That's how slow I am. I get to get things together. Okay. And I didn't have the right background. Okay. So this is just a butterfly bush. Over on the left-hand side, it's hard to see, but the sky is totally blown out. If you looked in the back of your camera, everything's blinking at me. Okay. So there's no detail in the clouds at all. Of course, storm clouds came in. So I didn't have pretty clouds in the background. I wanted to have it at the widest aperture. Now this is a cheap little zoom lens. So the widest aperture at the focal length that I was using is 5.6. That's as wide open as I can get this with this cheap little lens I had. Okay. So I wanted to get the background out of focus. So I opened up the aperture as wide as it would go. And I took a shot over there and I let the camera meter, and it metered for the flower. Okay. So the flower looks okay. The background is totally blown out. It's totally white on the computer, on the camera. Okay. So what I did was to control the ambient light, I bumped up the speed. Okay. So now I'm at 1/1600th of a second. You notice that the ISO and the aperture hasn't changed. So what I'm doing is I'm underexposing. So I'm underexposing for the clouds. So I'm getting some of the blue and some of those horrible storm clouds in. But you see what's also happened on the left-hand side, that's a tree. You don't even know that because it's going totally black, right? So I'll show you. So I'll show you what the problem here is. Okay, so then I set up my flash and I just popped it at 100%. It looks horrible. Okay, so everybody puts their flash away. So I'm never using that again. It doesn't work. It's horrible, right? Okay, So the background hasn't really changed. The lighting has changed a little bit because the sun was going in and out a little bit. So I'm still getting the blue. I'm still getting the storm clouds in the background. They're still out of focus because I have my aperture at 5.6. And I have the flower showing now. But at full power, it looks fake. So what I can do is take the power down on my flash. I didn't have any diffusers on it. It was just, I had this little diffuser on it. I could have, diffused the light and worked a little harder, but this is quick. And this happens, I was hoping a butterfly would be on the bush. They've been on there all month until I walked out this afternoon. Right? Okay. So to make it more natural, what I want to do is I want to play with the ambient light and also the flash. So the first thing I would do is I'd take the flash power down so it's not glaring off that flower, right? Okay, so here is the combination of the two. So you can see on the left-hand side, I kept the speed at 1600ths of a second. I kept the aperture the same because that worked well, but I bumped up the ISO because I wanted to open up the background a little more too. So the background's brighter, everything's all brighter, and I took the power down on the flash to half. So I'm trying to match the background to the foreground, okay? And the way you can do that is the ISO is going to change both. The ISO is going to change both the ambient light and the flash. So I should have brought it down maybe a quarter power or somewhere in between to do a better job there. But that looks much more natural, except all those harsh shadows, because my flash was on my camera. It wasn't off camera. It wasn't diffused. So I'm getting real harsh shadows where that leaf is crossing over the other leaf. So to make, I could have worked a little harder and, did a better job. But the point of this is I'm controlling the aperture by controlling the ambient light, okay? And then I'm dialing in the flash power with both the power itself and the ISO, okay? So if you've ever taken the flash and you took a picture of somebody in the shadows with harsh light in the background, and you just pop the flash right at them, everything looks all shiny, especially me, it'd be very shiny. If they're sweating, it's going to be really shiny. So a better technique is to take that flash off your camera and put it to the side, diffuse it better, use umbrellas or scrims or whatever, right? And to prove that the flash doesn't change if you don't change the ISO and the aperture, I just bumped the speed up to 8,000ths. And the only thing that changes was the ambient settings, the background. So the background got a lot darker, but the flash itself is exactly the same on both images, right? So this gives you artistic, leverage when you're outside. If you have a flash with you and you remember to put it in high sync mode, you can control the ambient with the shutter speed. Okay, the shutter speed always controls the ambient and doesn't affect the flash itself. Okay, there's one more mode, and my son helped me with this one too, right? Okay. Multi-flash or stroboscopic, and this is what I want to do in the workshop too. Okay, Kim's going to find her friend that does martial arts. Maybe we're going to try to schedule her, and she's going to jump and spin or whatever in here for us, and we're going to do some multi-flashes. See how sweated my son was? This was towards the end of the evening. He was running up and down the driveway now, and I was using multi-flash. Now this, you don't have to buy a special flash for your camera. If your camera can fire off the flash and it has the multi-flash or stroboscopic mode, you don't have to, your camera doesn't have to talk to the flash. All it has to say, okay, fire now, okay? And you can get 2 or 3, maybe 4 flashes per second out of most of these flashes. So he's just running, so it's almost total dark. We have it dialed in so that the ambient light, it's actually almost after dusk now. So pop, pop, pop. Okay, so 3 flashes as he's running towards me, and it freezes him against the dark background, right? Okay, there's 3 things you have to set when you're doing multi-flash. It's on the flash. or in your trigger. Okay, so the Godox system, it's in this trigger, and you control your flash through your triggers. If you don't have a trigger, you just go to the flash. It could be on your camera and set it on the flash. Okay, the camera doesn't do this. Okay, the camera doesn't communicate this. All the camera does is say, okay, flash now, and the flash pops. Okay, so this is the one that I used for this one and the 200. Okay, for this. So the V1 I used. So there's actually two flashes going here. You can see one is in the grass right in front of him, and the other one's on a stand to the right. So he's riding straight at the strongest light. So that's why the biggest light is hitting him in the face, right? So it's 1 second. Okay. So I set 3 settings. Okay. How many flashes do I want? Okay. How many times it's going to flash, and how fast it's going to flash. This is where everybody gets confused, is the frequency or speed or the hertz. It shows it as hertz. Okay, that's the speed of the flash. So if I have it set at 2 hertz, that means it's going to do 2 for every second. Okay, every flash is going to last for half a second. That's what that means, right? And I want it to flash 4 times. So I have to determine what is my shutter speed now. So what it is, it's the times divided by the hertz. Okay, so I have to keep my exposure open for 2 seconds to get all 4 flashes. Okay, if I wanted to get it all in within 1 second, I bump the hertz up to 4. You can think of that as how many times per second am I going to pop off the flash? Okay, there's a limit to this, because again, if you do it too fast, okay, or at high power, it's going to burn up your flash. So this flash has a limit of power. I can only do multi-flash at 1/4 power. It won't allow me to go higher than 1/4 power. Same with the AD200. I can only take it up to 1/4 power because it can't flash half power, full power that many times, more than 1 second. So it's going to limit the power setting. And the first time I was like, why can't I get it to half power? I want half power. That's why. If it allowed me to go to half power, this thing would start steaming, or it would explode. Okay, it really would. Okay, so 1/4 power is the limit of this one and the other Godox one I have. If you have bigger, powerful studio flashes, it might allow you to go a little bit stronger, right? So those things are really going to get hot, right? So this is at 3 times. I want to fire it 3 times at 3 hertz. It's already at 1/4 power. It won't allow me to go higher. It can go lower. Okay. So I have to have it at 1 second to get all 3 shots. Okay. So the first one's going to happen, and another one's going to happen, and the third one's going to happen. And I can't go higher than that, I don't think, with this smaller flash. So it's how many times, how fast it's going to happen, okay, and the power setting, right? Those 2 flashes I showed you, they do have limitations, okay? And you can just dial them up and down and play with them, and it'll automatically adjust what it can't do, right? So I know that I can do 3 at 3 hertz with that smaller, and that'll take 1 second, right? I can't do more than 3 at 1/4 power. If I take the power down, I might be able to get 4 per second, okay? At 8 at 1 hertz, okay, so 1 every second, I can fire off 8 shots. This is all at 1/4 power. If I take it up to 1/100th of a second, okay, that's you can't even see it. I can do 2, right? And that would be a 50th of a second. It's all going to happen within a 50th second. And you can go faster and faster and faster. I can take it up to 100 hertz. That's as high as I can take it, 100th of a second. And I can take that other number up if I bring the power down. So it's all balanced between how fast it can physically explode and how hot it's going to get. Okay, so Godox has that system built in, so it's not going to allow you to go over the limitations. And if you do fire off too many, it'll overheat, it'll shut itself down, luckily, right? The old ones wouldn't shut themselves down, and just it would start smoking out at the top of the frame. Now, I can do 3 at 3 hertz at 1/4 power. That's as powerful I can go. How many suns can you see? How many suns you can see up there? That's because I tricked it and I didn't sync them both, right? So I had two sitting side by side, and one was firing off of the other one. So it was out of sync. So I got one in between somehow. And I should have read. And I actually told him, can you please smile? Because he was, gritting his teeth most of the time. So he's smiling. He's actually having fun because he didn't have a chance to ride his bike all day. And right now he's out in Wisconsin somewhere doing 200 miles. Tomorrow's going to do only 50 miles, and he's going to do another one that's going to hit 4 states out there. I don't know what he's doing. He's having fun. That's what he does for fun. So no, that's because the logs aren't moving because I have it on a tripod now. The logs aren't moving. Yes. No, he's half bunny hopping, half pedaling over them. Yeah. He bunny hopped the first time. I said, you went too fast. So I had him slow down. I said, if I go any slower, I'm going to fall over. Little yellow streak.
Yeah.
It was. There were lightning bugs out there now.
Cool.
Yeah, that might have been what that was. Yes, they just started coming out because it's really getting dark now. Yes. Well, the question was, what the yellow streak? That's a lightning bug down in the bottom left-hand corner. Yeah. Yeah. So because I'm at 1 second, that's the light streak from the lightning bug. Exactly. So to get those 6, there's 6 in there.
Yeah.
The two flashes weren't synced perfectly, so one was going in between. Right. So I had the A200 and the V1 at the same time. Right. It happened by mistake, by the way, but now I can plan it that way. I'm like, what would happen if? So that's how I did it. And you can do stuff like in the basement again. I was throwing fake ice across that black glass. There's only 3 cubes or 4 cubes being thrown, and it's pulsing 3 times, so I'm getting twice as many cubes. And you can see that I'm getting motion blur, but I can't do a rear curtain sync and multi-strobe at the same time. So the motion blur is actually in front of the motion. So it looks like the cubes are going right to left. They're actually going left to right. Doesn't matter. You don't care. There's no writing on there anyhow, so you don't know, right? The background's getting a little bit of a glow because some of it's happening there. Okay, now is your test. This is a trick question. Which way are those balls rolling?
Rolling from left to right.
They're rolling from left to right, exactly, because I don't have rear curtain sync. So all of the motion blur is happening after the flash is firing off. So it fired off 3 times, so it froze it as it's rolling across, but the motion blur is in front of the motion instead of behind it. That's just one ball. Yeah, that's just one ball. Yeah. So you just roll it across, and I didn't take the little blue and purple gels off of so that's why we're getting a little bit of blue and purple on the white stripes, is because I used those gels on there. That's just shooting almost straight on at the edge of the glass. And this is another thing I forgot to mention: clean your glass, then clean your glass again, then clean it again, because you don't see all the fuzz and little lint and stuff on the glass. I had so many of those fish tank bubbles ruined because I had water stains on the front or the back of the glass because it was splashing and splashing. And I didn't see it until I brought it into the computer. Like, what's all that? It's the water stains on the outside of the glass where the water had splashed and dried. So you can't clean glass enough. So I didn't bother here as much. So that would be a lot of work in Photoshop. Okay, and sometimes you can't clean it up either. Okay, that's it. No. That's the gels on the flashes. He asked, am I using black light on this? That's a purple piece of plastic in front of one of my flashes. And on the one on the right, I have a piece of blue gel on the right one. So that's what's showing up on the edge of that glass is that purple. You could use a black light. I think I told everybody I don't like to buy a lot of stuff. I just bought a lightning trigger and a motion trigger because I got tired of bouncing tennis balls and ping pong balls and missing half the shots. So I bought a laser trigger and it's not working yet, but it will. So catch lightning, to break a laser beam, so it'll trigger everything when it breaks a laser beam. So I don't have to bounce the ball 100 times to be able to catch it. So I might have 50 that I missed the ball rolling across, and this is the one that got it perfect in the middle of my frame. Right. Okay, any other questions? I'm going to stop sharing, I think. I didn't hear anybody snoozing too much. Right, everybody's still out there, I guess.
That's a
Jay-
lot of information, Bob. Do you have any cheat sheets you could share?
We cut it back quite a bit. Okay, I know that if we just talked about one of the subjects, we could spend the whole hour playing. So that's what we want to do, is we want to get together here at the Goggle Works some Saturday, and I'll put that out, in the next couple of days, a date and a time. And we'll set some things up here. Maybe I'll bring in the fish tank and the black backdrop. Kim has a nice big black backdrop. We'll bring in some extra strobes and some triggers. One thing that I want to talk about, I don't know if you can see this on the camera. I can't see if I'm on there. Still sharing. No, I'm not sharing. Okay. But I'll share this online. If you're going with Godox triggers, the nice big ones that has the screen on top and it's at an angle. I don't know if you can see this out there in the Zoom world. I bought this one, and the reason I bought this one, it has a hot shoe on the top. So it's the R2T. This is actually a Adorama's product. It's Flashpoint, because I put some of the old studio lights, they don't have a Godox receiver in them. Okay, so you can hook them up, and this is what we do in the workshops here. We use these Pocket Wizards. So I can use a combination of the Godox trigger to fire off and control my Godox, and put this on top, and all this does is fire this Pocket Wizard, and I can connect that to some old studio lights that I have. So I can use both that way. If I didn't buy this one, I could only fire off the Godox. Okay, so this allows me to put a different trigger on top, and I use an old Cactus trigger once in a while, like Cowboy Studios, I think it was. And all that does is fire. It doesn't do any high-speed sync. It doesn't do anything else except fire it. So I use this in combination sometimes to combine the Godox and some of the old flashes that I have. Right. So if you're looking for a trigger, this isn't as nice. It doesn't have all the features of the other one, but has 99% of the features. It's just difficult to set it up, a little more difficult on this small screen on the back. I think, Rick, you have the what they call the Pro one, yeah. And the Godox, I think you have Nikon. You can do the rear curtain sync without the Godox connected to your camera. Okay. So you can do it all through the triggers. I can't do it through my triggers because I'm on Pentax. Right. So that's something you want to look for. Okay, Vince, question?
Question for Greg. With your dogs in your studio, are you using first curtain, second curtain, or multiple flashes? What is your routine for your set?
Here, let me share the mic.
All right.
So I want to repeat that, because one of our pros here, Vince asked him if he uses first curtain or second curtain, and Greg said, I don't know. Okay, but he does some amazing work. So it's probably first, but you're freezing it. So the dogs are moving, but you don't have all the ambient light in there either. So he shuts down the ambient light and shuts down the aperture. So he's removing the motion blur. So the flashes, you said you're not sure. So it's probably first curtain then. Yeah. And it's working perfectly. So who cares? You can forget everything that I said tonight. Any other questions? Jay, do you have any questions on the chat or anything?
I don't have any questions on the chat, but for the follow-up workshop you do, it might be helpful to send out a list of what we should bring. Do we need to bring a trigger? And that sort of stuff, anything we should bring along with us.
If you have a trigger, that'd be fine, but you're probably going to use the ones we supply here. Because we need to cut people off from different flashes, so we don't want everybody setting up their own triggers. But if you have one, bring it in, we can talk about it. If you have,
Everybody has a different brand camera, different,
exactly,
you know, and different brand camera, different types of flashes, so you can work with anything people have.
yeah, if you use Godox, bring in your Godox trigger, because we'll set up something with just Godox flashes. And then we'll use the Pocket Wizards for the communal flashes, because we don't want people resetting everything with their Godox triggers. But if you have a trigger, definitely bring it in. If you have an old flash, bring it in too, because we can play with everybody's equipment here. We can go out in the hall and do some things too. It doesn't have to be what we're doing here in the room. Yeah, so definitely bring whatever you want to play with. Anything else?
No, not from me. Anybody else have any questions?
Anybody else out there, if you want to unmute? If you're still awake. I didn't flash to wake you up. I will do this after I'm off the camera. Just to show you how fast that is. All right. All right, thank you guys. I'm going to, we'll log off. Make sure you stop the recording.